Good morning. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, November 21st, 2024. I will now ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, November 7, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 8, or the draft order for limited reopening notice and request for comments in docket 4220 CE 183 associated with agenda item 9.
I move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 through 8.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 4220 CE 183, I move we approve the draft order for limited reopening of the docket to receive comment on the project route adjustment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so that brings us to agenda item 10, docket 4220 AF 113, the application of Northern States Power Company for approval of certain accounting treatment for 2025. Commissioner Nieto is actually going to lead our discussion on this today, so I will turn it over to her for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Strand. So before us today is an application from Northern States Power, Wisconsin, seeking commission approval of certain accounting treatments. This proposal is significant as NSPW aimed to avoid filing for a 2025 test year rate increase while addressing forecasted revenue deficiencies for its electric and natural gas utilities. NSPW seeks to maintain current base rates for 2025, despite anticipating revenue shortfalls of $45.8 million for electric and $9.5 million for natural gas. And the company aims to manage these deficits through accounting adjustments, operational efficiencies, and cost reductions. In the application, the company states that the proposal will offset some, but not all, of the 2025 revenue requirement deficiency. And the estimate is that the proposal will eliminate regulatory liabilities in the amount of $27.6 million and will create regulatory assets in the amount of $5.1 million. Overall, I think the applicant did a good job in framing this request around the public interest and the requirements applicable to rate making and deferrals. So I'd like to take a moment to recognize that and recognize NSPW's work here and for bringing us a package that balances what I think is a kind of delicate negotiation between maintaining affordable rates for customers and ensuring the company's operational and financial viability. They did a good job of finding a way to share these costs and risks among the utility and customers and to bring forth a constructive voluntary package here. And for me, that's what makes this proposal clearly in the public interest, and I will be voting in favor of it with one minor modification. I would also like to address the comments we received and thank the commenters. I did find the comments of the Citizens Utility Board especially useful. They point out that not only does this proposal avoid a rate increase for customers, but that it makes sure that the company has some skin in the game as well. And I do think Cub astutely pointed out that an underlying question for the commission is whether the commission would have entertained a test year 2025 rate case. The commission updated its rate case schedule for the state's large IOUs in 2023. And so we're coming up on what would be the first rate case for NSPW under the new schedule, which is why some of this came about in the first place. And the updated schedule by the commission provides that a utility, that NSPW can file in odd years for even test years. And the schedule also provided that in keeping with the past, utilities are able to request 1-year test years. And then 2-year test years are available upon request as an exception due to circumstances that are listed in that document. So taking Cub's note into consideration and due to the timing of the update on the rate case schedule, and this being the first round of cases to go through on the new schedule, I would approve this request. And so going through the alternatives here, the first item that we have to decide on is another threshold type matter, the determination of the forecasted revenue deficiencies. And for that one, I was at Alt 1. Chair Strand?
Thank you, and thank you for that opening. I think you did an excellent job of summarizing kind of why we're here and then some of the underlying benefits and, creative solutions that the applicant brought forward to minimize impacts, especially to the customers. So thank you for that. You did a really good job of kind of placing that in context for us. But I'm at alternative 1 on this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hawkins?
I am at alternative 1 as well.
Great, thank you. And next, we have a decision point on discontinuing the deferral of IRA and IIJA impacts. This is the one where I had the minor modification, and this has to do with the reporting date. So I'm at Alt 2, accept the applicant's request as modified, and then my modification would be sub-Alt B, and there I would require the applicant to file a report by May 1, 2025, and that would be an informational estimate of the 2025 nuclear PTC forecast amount that will be received, and then require the applicant to file a report itemizing the actual amount received of the nuclear PTC forecast by May 1, 2026. So there would be 2 reports. And again, the applicant in its comments raised the 2026 date, and that was helpful. Chair Strand?
I am in agreement with your position and actually was considering offering the May 1st, 2026 report as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense because at that point, we'll actually know the actual amounts versus the 2025 when it'll just be partial. So I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah, same here. I can support your suggestion there. I think it's important that these PTC values can be estimated relatively easily, I would assume. So I think that's important to clearly ask for that because we don't really need to wait necessarily for the 100% certainty. So I fully support your recommendation there.
Great, thank you. And the next decision point we have is on the 2025 amortization of the 2024 IRA deferral. Here I'm at Alt 1.
Alt 1, thank you.
Alt 1 for me as well.
Alt 1. And next is eliminate capacity purchase power cost deferral requirement. I'm at Alt 1 here.
Alt 1.
Alt 1.
Great. And deferral of revenue requirement impacts of natural gas capital investments. Alt 1.
Alt 1, thank you.
Alt 1 for me as well.
Thank you. And deferral of incremental EVSI O&M costs. Alt 1.
I'm fine with Alt 1 as well, thank you.
Alt 1.
Okay, thank you. And earnings sharing mechanism, I'm at Alt 1.
Alt 1.
Alt 1.
Great. And overall approval of certain accounting treatments, Alt 1.
I'm at Alt 1 as well. I think, do we need to be at Alt 2 though because of the modification, or are we good?
Either one works. I think it was sort of presumed, subject to the
prior
prior
one?
decisions
Okay,
is how
yep.
I think that was written.
Perfect, yeah, as long as the modification is captured, I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Alt 1 for me as well.
Great, thank you. And are we ready for a motion? In docket 4220 AF 113, I move we approve the applicant's request for certain accounting treatments as modified by the commission, consistent with our discussion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Nieto.
Thanks.
We are now moving on to agenda item 11, which is docket 5 EI 161, the investigation on the commission's own motion to review resource adequacy standards and requirements. Commissioner Hawkins will be leading our discussion on this item, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him.
Awesome. Thank you, Chair Strand. So as mentioned, this is an investigative docket with a lot of history, and so before digging in, I'll set up and explain some of the background leading up to the internal investigation that we are here to discuss today. I'd also like to thank my colleagues for allowing me to lead this topic on what happens to be my favorite topic, and so while it's not quite Christmas, we have the Winter Wonderland, and it feels like a gift to me. So. And I say that because I truly believe that resource adequacy is one of the most important responsibilities that this commission has. And so I really look forward to discussing this topic today and working on it in the future as well. So I want to shout out to commission staff for their work on this, and I appreciate your openness to my late-in-the-game thoughts and concerns in this docket, so appreciate the flexibility there. I also want to recognize that we had 9 responses to the commission's December 2023 memo that were very helpful in identifying the preliminary scope items that we will be talking about as we make decisions on the scope of this proceeding moving forward. So thank you for all of the very valuable input from those who weighed in. So today at a high level, we're going to continue the conversation on how we want to evolve the requirements and guidance provided by this commission to our utilities to inform how they plan to maintain reliability and resource adequacy moving forward. Ultimately, we are just going to be making a decision of the scope of that investigation and what we're going to work on in this proceeding. And while we've had clear guidance for our utilities since we last made a decision in this area about 16 years ago, the world has not stood still around us, and we're part of a larger regional grid that plays an important role in this area as well. And so I believe the time is ripe to review our existing requirements and set ourselves up for the future and continued reliability moving forward. So for just a bit of background on the topic, maintaining resource adequacy is making sure that our utilities have enough supply to meet demand at all points in time to serve their customers. RA touches a lot of different places of work within the commission. Primarily the applications to construct or purchase new generation is where these requirements are most key. Also the strategic energy assessment and monitoring our activities in the MISO market are also very related to this topic. And while the commission reviews RA, the commission has not provided guidance in this area since October of 2008. So, and at that point, we established planning requirements for the prompt year and also a forward-looking requirement, and we'll discuss both of those in the scoping topics later on in our conversation. So, the drivers for why we need to evaluate our requirements and what our utilities are planning towards are driven by some recent significant changes to how requirements are set at the MISO level. So those requirements are informed by a loss of load or a risk study that is conducted by MISO. And I just want to stress something that I think is really important for the commission to keep in mind, that those requirements that have changed at MISO, each of those changes were brought about at the request of state regulators, including the Wisconsin Commission through their work at OMS. So while there's a lot of discussion by commenters and in the memo that MISO changes require us to change, it is really driven by regulators exercising their jurisdiction in this area. And this is just a next step that was fully recognized when those changes were being proposed and brought forward. So this evolution is in part driven by our own action and our exercising of our jurisdiction through our involvement at MISO. So I think that's really important and central to this conversation. I'm also really happy to see that one of the key points that I make when talking about this topic was brought up often in the comments. And so while it's very clear that states have jurisdiction in this area and have an ability to set our own resource adequacy requirements, which we have on the books, we are part of a larger grid, and our customers receive a great deal of value from being a part of that grid through lower overall requirements and sharing of the risk. So in order to achieve our North Star goals of reliability and affordability, we need to make sure that our requirements are in alignment and complement the broader regional market and the requirements established at MISO. So again, we need to recognize that we play a critical role there, and I just want to make sure that we don't do anything that diminishes the value that our customers receive from those lower requirements. So this docket was opened in August of 2023, and like I said, we're going to evaluate the guidance and requirements we have. Today, we're just discussing the scope of the investigative docket, and the discussion will provide guidance to staff and inform our next steps in this proceeding. So to that end, I'll provide an overview of each of the topics and my suggestions for that scope, and I'm looking forward to hearing the perspectives of Chair Strand and Commissioner Nieto. Before doing that and diving into each of the 4 topics that were teed up in the memo, I turn it over to the 2 of my colleagues to see if they have any opening remarks.
Thank you. I'll just say that we are very fortunate at the commission to have you here, and as our delegated commissioner on these issues, given your vast knowledge and expertise on these issues. And so I'm really glad that you're doing that and that you're walking us through this and that you have a role in this investigation.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
I'd agree with everything Chair Strand just said, and I don't have other introductory remarks, just looking forward to this discussion and looking forward to the investigation moving forward here. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so with that, we'll go topic by topic through what was teed up in the memo for us to discuss, and I'll pause after giving some background. But the first topic teed up here was resource adequacy metrics, and the reason that this is so central is that what you measure and what you use to assess resource adequacy is what sets the requirements. It's the foundational item, and it's kind of served as the core of our prior guidance. And so there's a discussion of an evolution in the industry of different metrics being studied and thought about in other external areas, including MISO and NERC and other industry groups. And the suggestion in the memo was that we add to that and basically do our own study and kind of inform ourselves. So I have some good news to report here, which is I think that there's a lot of good work going on in this area outside of the commission, and I don't necessarily think this investigation should be additive or parallel to that. We're already involved in those conversations at MISO through OMS, and I strongly believe that our efforts in this docket should be focused on, and we mentioned in the memo, limited staff resources multiple times, should be focused on making sure our guidance and requirements are in alignment with those efforts at MISO, but not duplicative, and in recognition that some of this expertise is evolving and in flux, and we don't have to recreate the wheel. So I think this resource adequacy metric, we are in a good place. We have a reference of the 1 in 10 LOLE standard, which is still the core component at MISO, and it's not going anywhere. So I feel confident that what we have on the books is solid here, and that the ongoing conversations elsewhere should not be duplicated by requiring staff to just report studies and things like that. So those are my high-level thoughts on this first topic, and opening it up to my colleagues.
I agree with your approach, and I think it makes sense, and I think it's a good use of resources and a good use of your role with the organization of MISO states. So, supportive, thank you.
Yep, I support that as well and agree with the discussion here. And just one question is, do you envision, so the first of the topics, the metrics themselves, maintaining those in the scope to the extent that they need to be a part of the broader discussion, but not maintaining them in the scope to the extent that staff is directed to reinvent the wheel? Is that kind of where you're at?
Absolutely, yeah. They inform the core requirement of what our utilities need for the next upcoming year, but we don't need to be going out and directing staff to sort of find new answers that
Develop
are
its own methodology and
exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. The next topic was the out-year reserve requirements, and so this is basically guidance that we currently offer or require of our utilities to plan towards a 14.5% planning reserve margin. The comments were received and sort of spot on that this is outdated. It doesn't really line up with the reserve margins that are being required by MISO or that are being studied and forecasted into the future. So our current guidance is certainly outdated. just from the fact that we have this floor that really isn't in alignment with what is required in reality. And there's also been a change to having seasonal requirements, and our current requirement does not speak to that either. So that was rightly pointed out in many of the comments. So I think it's worth evaluating how we can revise our out-year guidance, but I'd recommend we do not try to find and fix a new floor number, as it will always be a moving target. And so while we've had one for 16 years that's been valuable, I don't think a new out-year floor is the answer that we should seek in this investigation. I'd recommend that we rely on the prompt year requirements, the upcoming year requirements, and also the expectations of where they may change or what drivers of uncertainty in those requirements might be reasonably expected. So we could establish some longer-term planning principles or something like that, but overall, I think it's important that we provide the direction that the prompt year, the next year's requirement is what matters, and it's relatively stable, and that there should be planning done to account for uncertainties in that number and allow for flexibility, as that's critically important and was raised by many of the commenters. But I don't think our investigation for the out-year reserve margin should be in search of a new magic number. So that is my high-level take on topic 2, and I'll open it up to my colleagues.
I support your approach here too, and I think you're thinking even further down the road, which is great in terms of making sure that we're prepared, but not undertaking something that is either not necessary or could be contrary to kind of where we go and where this ends up. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I do as well. I think it's a scope solution that captures all of the needs that we have. I think we're looking for something that's a lot more flexible and adaptable than the current 14.5% floor, but we're also looking for something that smooths out year-to-year changes.
Yep.
And I think your approach and solution will accomplish both of those in the course of this investigation. I think there were comments raised by WUA that the commission should refrain from immediately replacing the PRMR and watch and see how some of the considerations currently in progress at MISO unfold and resolve. So another question I have is just in regard to the vision with what you just proposed here, are you also proposing watching those changes unfold?
Yeah, good question. So I think the studies at MISO right now produce out-year estimates for what the reserve margins are going to be, and they fluctuate with time. And so similar to what we have for our prompt year requirement, which is we reference the MISO planning reserve margin requirement, we could just reference those out-year requirements as valid, points of information to plan towards. And so whether or not we get rid of the 14.5, I think we have something that we can point to still as a reference point while not being like a firm requirement, and let the prompt year reserve margin, which is the most certain, be the ultimate driver, and recognizing that there will be things that cause it to change year to year. But those are things that the utilities are good at understanding and capturing that uncertainty. So I think we could do away with the floor and just adopt by reference the points of information that are out there. And then the other aspect that I brought up, so reliance on the prompt year is really the important thing. Recognizing that MISO has out-year estimates is also key in my view. And then we could consider some longer-term planning principles that we might, want to develop. And so that is open-ended and intentionally vague at this point. But I think to sort of get at that recognition that there's more guidance we could offer there, but we'd need more information as to what that might look like.
That's really helpful. I support that as well.
Okay,
So thank you.
great. All right, so topic 3, commission practices relating to MISO's resource adequacy framework. And get ready, this is really my sweet spot. So I'd like to stress again that while the resource adequacy framework at MISO is evolving, it has only evolved when the commissions through OMS has supported and really driven the changes to occur in the first place. I was really relieved to see in comments a lot of suggestions that we just need to evolve or tweak our processes to supplement and align with the MISO resource adequacy construct. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that is in the spirit of what the states envisioned at MISO when these changes were being proposed, is that they would be driven at MISO to the benefit of the broader regional reliability of the grid and to the benefit of customers throughout MISO, and then state processes would have to adapt and incorporate those changes. And so we're really at that step right now. So I do believe there's a need for some additional guidance to account for these changes, and I have 4 specific items teed up for incorporation in this one. The first one is access to information. This was brought up by a lot of the commentary. There was a big focus on making sure there is sufficient visibility to resource planning, retirement decisions, all that sort of stuff. And here it's important to note that RA planning or resource planning generally has evolved in a pretty big way where everyone's resources value is dependent on their neighbor's resource decisions as well. So what our utilities generators count for towards their requirements depends on the whole fleet. So we need visibility, but not just within Wisconsin. We need regional visibility. So I think we should investigate how we can encourage our utilities to provide that visibility into a lot of the regional tools that are available and currently being developed in recognition of the fact that planning really has changed, and more access to information and a range of assumptions and things like that are useful to planning. So I don't have any suggestions for how we need to tweak our reporting requirements or visibility into resources here in Wisconsin necessarily, but I do think we need to provide guidance for our expectations for how our utilities inform broader regional looks at reliability and resource adequacy. So I believe all of our utilities participate in many different surveys and provide information, but I think we could really set a clear expectation that they provide as much information as they have and estimates for future resource adequacy and things like that, in recognition that regional looks are really going to be important for planning going forward. So that was one suggestion I have. I also believe we need to clarify how some of the recent changes at MISO should be thought about by our utilities. And so basically how this fits with the first topic of we have a prompt year reserve margin, and what do these recent changes at MISO do to impact how they should plan for that. I've seen some comments in this docket related to one of those changes, the reliability-based demand curve, that is just incorrect. And that is just, recognizing that there's new requirements that are out there and people are trying to understand what it means to how they plan. And so I think we should offer some clear guidance for how we expect our utilities to account for these new changes, seasonality, reliability-based demand curve, accreditation changes. So I'd like to see that be a big part of the scope, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with how this should impact planning. Then there was a comment raised that I think is valuable to consider here, which is how we evaluate cost recovery of capacity purchases in the MISO auction. That was raised by WUA. I need additional information on that, but I think it's very reasonable to include that in the scope and investigate our current processes, their limitations, and what suggested changes there may be to that. So I think that's a really valid item to include in this topic. And then lastly, there's a potential pressing need on the horizon. There are changes being discussed at MISO related to fast-tracking generation in the interconnection queue. And that process isn't really in alignment with how states review and approve new generators. And so we don't have a process that is necessarily able to work with that type of framework. And so I see us in the near term needing to position ourselves to be ready for what if MISO adopts some sort of fast-track interconnection queue, given all the major load growth that is expected on the system. How will we update our processes to account for that? Because right now there's a pretty sizable gap, I believe, in how we would be faced with that question coming from MISO. So I think that's important just to keep in the hopper and work on. I don't have any, silver bullets on that one, but I just see that being a key issue here in this topic of how our planning fits with the MISO RA framework. So that's it, just four.
Just that. Thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly, that since this is a scoping decision, that these are things that we want to investigate and look into as part of this docket. And that when we get to other decision points later on related to what the findings of this investigation, that the things that we are being asked to consider at that point are all things that, are within what the commission can require or direct our stakeholders to do. So I just want to make sure that what you are suggesting fits within the current scope and is still kind of part of the general direction that we want to go in on those topics.
Yeah, great question. Really is just my Christmas list for what I would like to see included and also just developed further. And that would definitely include, a legal analysis of like what limitations or actions we could or couldn't take. But I think these are all just important points that need to be part of the overall picture moving forward.
Perfect. Okay, that makes a ton of sense for me at this point in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a similar question. I don't have issues with including and flagging these four additions for further consideration and discussion, and always open to discussing anything that makes sense or would be helpful. And I think as long as to Chair Strand's point that we're not really locking in on necessarily having to take action on each of these items. Some of these items were items I wouldn't necessarily take action on at this point, but open to hearing what everybody has to say about them and developing the investigation.
Great. Okay, I think that brings us to our final topic, which was future planning requirements, which was more of a catch-all of things that were raised in the comments, and it was teed up additional periodic reporting or planning guidance that could inform future resource planning or evaluation thereof. I'm a little uncertain on where to go with this one. I think one possible thing, and this is just my newness to the process, that could be helpful here is if we could develop some clear or consistent expectations for what staff would expect to see in new generation applications. And there are some things, that are sort of floating about there, like fuel supply, extreme weather considerations, access to transmission, seasonality, things like that. So I think it could be helpful that we develop at the commission some sort of standard items we'd like to see discussed in applications for new generation. So again, that might just be my ignorance of the existing process, but I think there's an opportunity here. So interested to hear what others have.
So as all of you have probably heard me say a bunch of times, I think that involves a discussion with, the staff that will be then reviewing the applications from like an engineering perspective and a technical perspective and an environmental perspective. And I think most importantly, we need to make sure that we are being clear upfront at the appropriate time in the process to the applicants so that they know what the expectations are when. Because, I don't like requiring things after the fact or, halfway through or then holding them to things that maybe we didn't ask for initially. So I think the internal communication and collaboration is going to be an important first step on this. And then, again, conveying that information to the applicants at the appropriate time so that we are not catching people off guard or kind of moving the goalpost midway through the game kind of thing. So again, I think the idea and the approach makes a lot of sense. And then how internally and externally those things are communicated and implemented is going to be important to me.
That makes sense to me as well, and I was thinking something similar. I think there is a clear nexus here with these topics and the CA-CPCN process, and I think some of what we'd like to see discussed in applications is set forth in the application filing requirements, and so some of that is part of application filing requirement dockets and updates and orders that we issue. So we're getting a little, there's a crossover between the two topics and a nexus. And I think your suggestion to generally have that be part of this discussion makes sense. And then that may impact, I think to Tara Strand's point, practical steps taken in an AFR docket after that kind of internal review and a proposal and an order process and that kind of thing. And also to the point of, giving everybody an adequate heads up and those AFRs go through public comment and all of that. So I think that makes sense. And I really think what you're suggesting here and a little bit of what you suggested in the last point is touching upon pieces of one addition that I had. And it is really coming into some of this discussion of reporting and transparency, planning, CPCN, CA process, which is, to me, I think in this catch-all item, I would be at an option to include affordability, the critical issue of affordability into this list. So on that very last bullet point of suggestions, I would include just the words affordability and insert those in front of the word flexibility. And I think, to the comments of the industrial customers groups, industrial customer groups and the Citizens Utility Board, among several other commenters in this investigation, there is an inextricable link. There are inextricable links among reliability, resource adequacy, and affordability and cost. And I think part of the struggle here is affordability is a big topic. And so it's part of some of those practical considerations that you're raising, as in, I don't know right at this point exactly the process and the mechanics of inserting a specific report or anything like that into the process, but it's something that we need to keep in scope and actually be discussing. I do think considering affordability in this docket comes down to the central tenets of our roles as commissioners in finding the balance between safety, reliability, and affordability. And I think, to not consider affordability and utility resource plans is inviting escalation of rates that will become unaffordable for customers who are trying to make ends meet and large energy users in the state, making those less competitive. So I think we need to look at this proactively together at the front end as we're bringing some of those inputs and that guidance that you're talking about into this process. So for all those reasons, I would add affordability into this consideration. Thanks.
Yeah, I fully support that. I think the topic of resource adequacy is not only, the main ingredient for reliability. You need to have enough generation. It's also the biggest component of cost in utility bills. And so all of your comments, very, very well put and very well taken. I think, that was sort of tying into my comments earlier on how we need to be in alignment with the regional grid, because that is where we get a lot of that affordability benefit, is by reducing those requirements. And so I think your addition there is a great one that we should include in topic 4 as well.
I agree. I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle, and like you said, it can help us in balancing those various tenets of the mission that we need to consider. I think if we're getting a piece, and especially to Commissioner Hawkins' point, that it's a large part of some of these projects and some of these costs, that we need to consider that as well, and it's all part of the puzzle. So it makes sense to me. Thank you.
Okay, well, I do not have any other items to discuss, and so we have a decision to make as far as the scope. And so for that, I was at alternative 2, which was to modify the above-mentioned topics for the scope of the investigation, consistent with our discussion here today. And then the only part of my script I did not develop was the motion to do that. So let me ad-lib here. So I move in docket 5 EI 161 that we move forward with alternative 2, as I just stated.
You can say consistent with the commission's discussion.
Consistent with discussion, you pros
That
over there.
covers, but yeah, do you want her to make?
Oh, should I not have done that?
Either one of you can, that's
Yeah.
fine.
I just want to make sure that
Yep,
you
I'm-
and staff
yep,
have what they
yep,
need.
Directing staff to continue with the investigation consistent with the scope discussed here today.
Second. I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hawkins and Commissioner Nieto, for leading a lot of our substantive discussions today. This does conclude our official business for today. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 26th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m. So slightly different. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I move we stand adjourned until Tuesday, November 26, 2024 at 10:30 a.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned.